The library was silent, the kind of silence that felt heavier than air, thick with dust, the faint smell of old pages, and the soft ticking of a wall clock no one seemed to notice anymore. It was the kind of place where even the scrape of a chair leg felt like an offense. That was why Mrs. Margaret Halloway, the librarian of St. Augustine's public library, prided herself on running it like a church. Rules were rules. Silence was sacred. And children, especially noisy, restless ones, were her sworn enemy. So, when a boy in worn-out sneakers and a second-hand coat shuffled nervously between the shelves that Thursday afternoon, Margaret's lips pursed like they'd just bitten into vinegar. She narrowed her eyes above her thick glasses and adjusted the bun at the back of her head. The boy, maybe 11 or 12, carried no backpack, no schoolbooks, not even a notebook. He held only a crumpled letter clutched to his chest like it was a treasure. His face had that pale, hungry look of someone who had skipped too many meals. His brown eyes darted around the shelves with a mix of awe and fear, like he wasn't sure if he belonged. Mrs. Halloway tapped her pen sharply against the counter. "Excuse me, young man," she barked, her voice slicing through the silence. "This isn't a playground. Whatever you're looking for, make it quick. We don't allow loitering." The boy flinched at her tone. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, like words had failed him. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as though deciding whether to run or stay. "Well?" she demanded. "Do you need help? Or are you just here to waste time?" The boy's hands trembled as he smoothed out the crumpled letter. His voice, when it finally came, was soft but steady. "I'm supposed to find Mrs. Margaret Halloway. The letter says to come here today at 3 o'clock. Her pen froze mid-tap. "What did you just say?" He held up the letter, the envelope yellowed with age. Her own name was written across it in delicate cursive, her late sister's handwriting. Margaret had worked at the library for over 30 years. She had no children, no husband, no family left. At least, not since her sister Lillian had passed away nearly a decade ago. She told herself she didn't mind. Books were quieter than people. Books didn't betray you. But the sight of that handwriting, it was like a ghost reaching out from the grave. She snatched the letter from the boy's hand, her fingers trembling. The envelope had been sealed with red wax, something her sister had always loved to do, even for grocery lists. Slowly, she broke it open. The letter was brief. "Dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I pray this boy has found his way to you. His name is Samuel. He is my grandson. Your blood. Please take care of him or at least hear him out. I have left instructions in my will, and you are the one who must read it to him. With love, Lillian." Margaret's vision blurred. Her sister's grandson? She didn't even know Lillian had a child, let alone a grandchild. And now this boy was standing in front of her, watching her with wary eyes, bracing himself for rejection. She looked at him again. At the hollow cheeks, the patched sleeves, the way he stood as though ready to flee. "Your name is Samuel?" she asked, her voice rough. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. Margaret's instinct was to retreat, to protect herself with the armor of rules and order. She was not a guardian. She was a librarian. And yet, she couldn't stop staring at him. The silence between them grew heavy until Samuel shuffled his feet. "My grandma said this was the only place I'd find answers. She made me memorize the address before she got sick. I didn't know where else to go." For reasons she couldn't name, irritation flared. Maybe it was the weight of responsibility suddenly thrust upon her. Maybe it was fear. "This is highly irregular," she snapped. "Do you understand what you're saying? I run a library, not an orphanage. And barging in here expecting." Her voice cracked like a whip. Samuel's chin lowered to his chest. His fingers curled into fists. For a moment, he looked exactly like what he was. An orphan who had run out of places to turn. Margaret stopped mid-sentence. The boy's silence hit her harder than any argument. She had raised her voice at him when all he'd asked for was, "What? A chance?" She set the letter down and adjusted her glasses, suddenly ashamed. "Sit down," she said quietly, gesturing to a chair. Let's read this properly. From beneath the counter, Margaret retrieved a worn manila folder labeled Lillian Hawthorne, Last Will and Testament. She remembered storing it there years ago, after her sister's passing, when grief had been too raw to face. She had never opened it. Her hands shook as she slid the papers free. Samuel leaned forward, eyes wide, as though every word would decide his fate. She began to read aloud. The will was simple, almost heartbreakingly so. Lillian had no great fortune, no estates or treasures. But she left something greater, her home, a modest two-bedroom cottage on the outskirts of town, and a small bank account meant to cover Samuel's education until he turned 18. And then came the line that stopped Margaret cold. I entrust my sister Margaret to oversee these matters, and to decide if Samuel is to live under her care until he comes of age. I leave this to her judgment, believing she will do what is right. The words echoed in the room. Samuel swallowed hard. Does that mean I can stay somewhere? That I won't have to go back to the shelter? His eyes, wide and pleading, reminded her so painfully of Lillian's when they were girls that Margaret had to look away. Margaret had spent years convincing herself she was fine alone. But as she sat across from this boy, her sister's grandson, she felt a piece of her armor fall away. She thought of all the quiet evenings in the library, the empty house she returned to each night, the silence she pretended was enough. Was it really? Samuel shifted nervously. If it's too much, I understand. I can go back. I just thought maybe... He trailed off, his voice breaking. Margaret surprised herself by reaching across the desk, placing her hand over his small, trembling one. You're not going back to the shelter, she said firmly. Not while I'm here. For the first time since he walked in, Samuel smiled. A small, cautious smile, but real. The weeks that followed were not easy. Samuel moved into Margaret's tidy little house, and suddenly her life was filled with noise she hadn't known she missed. Laughter, clumsy footsteps, the sound of someone else breathing in the same space. At first, she tried to enforce her rigid order. Bedtimes at 9 sharp, books stacked neatly, shoes at the door. But Samuel's presence softened her. She found herself laughing when he tripped over the cat, or when he tried and failed to cook spaghetti without turning the kitchen into a war zone. At the library, patrons were stunned to see her accompanied by a boy who shadowed her every step, carrying stacks of books with eagerness instead of resentment. The woman once feared for her sharp tongue now seemed almost warm. One afternoon, as Samuel helped her shelve books, he whispered, "Do you think Grandma knew this would happen? That we'd find each other?" Margaret swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes," she said softly. "I think she did." Months later, the library held its annual community night. Margaret usually dreaded it, too many people, too much chatter. But this year, she stood proudly beside Samuel as he read aloud from one of his favorite books, his voice steady, his eyes alight with confidence. When the applause filled the room, Margaret's heart swelled with something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. She realized then that her sister hadn't just left Samuel to her. She had given her a second chance, at family, at love, at life itself. And it all began the day she yelled at an orphan boy in her library, not knowing he was the key to her own unfinished story.